Hey guys, welcome to the second video where I interview Japanese learners. Today we have a special guest called Crispy. He's from London and he's an active member of the AJAC community.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Krispy. I've been part of the AJAC community for about 2 years. I just tweet loads of random crap in Japanese and slowly but surely trying to get to a really high level.
So, how long have you been learning Japanese and how long have you been doing AJAT?
Yeah, so it's quite a long story. But I mean, I've picked up and dropped Japanese probably 3 times over the course of maybe like 10 or so years. So I'm 26 at the moment, and I first started probably when I was about 15, 14. At that time, I didn't know anything about Japanese learning a language, um, anything about AJAT at all. I don't think there was even any half of the technologies or the philosophy really at that point. So I was really just sort of watching anime, trying to pick out words, writing them down on loads of different individual flashcards, and then trying bit by bit to slowly become less of a beginner. At that time, I dropped it as you know it was quite inefficient just to have a flashcards piece of paper and review it every day. So I then decided to try it at university, which was probably about 4 or 5 years later. I took a semester which was essentially just classes in university. But due to like loads of other commitments, I ended up just dropping it. Um, and then, sort of maybe like 2 years ago, is when I first discovered the AJAC community, Matt versus Japan's videos, and then really, took a big interest in Japanese. It seemed like something that was a lot more doable. So I sort of watched all of the relevant AJAT videos that I could to get an understanding of what I should be doing. I saw some of the results from the other people, of course, Matt, and loads of others in the community, and then, decided to start myself. So it's been 2 years or so since I started in AJAT. I've paused a couple of times throughout that, but at this, even whilst I've been paused, I've still been doing like reviews and that kind of thing on Anki. I just haven't been as actively learning. But in when I look at my Anki and the new cards every day and that kind of thing, it's probably been at least a year and a half now of doing AJAT. When I first started this time round, I did try with a textbook, so I've got like a 2,000 card deck or something filled out, plus my own deck, which is now almost at 10,000 cards. Um, so yeah, bit rambly, but yeah, that's my sort of story on how I first, learned about Japanese and why I decided to learn it.
So, you said you have 10,000 cards. Were you doing Anki before AJAT or after?
Yeah, so it becomes quite a deep topic, but basically, the when I started AJAT around 2 years ago, I think the month specifically was like July 2021. Around that time, I was really looking back on Japanese, and I thought, like I really didn't get the results that I wanted to with Japanese. I've spent all this time, but I think at most I was barely like an N4 level. So at that time, I did the only thing I knew how to do, which was grab a textbook and then try and go through it that way. Um, I did start using Anki at that time, but not to the degree that I do with AJAT now. So maybe for about 2 months, I was doing the Minna no Nihongo book series. I finished that and then pretty much immediately found AJAT, and I just went, completely fully into the AJAT thing. So probably around 2 years ago, I officially started in like, I don't know, maybe May or something, but didn't start AJAT until July 2021. So I'd heard about Anki before, but I didn't really know how to use it, what the effects of it were, how to use it most effectively, that kind of thing. So I had used it, but until I discovered AJAT, I was basically quite clueless on how to use it effectively.
What exactly is AJAT? do you have to spend a certain amount of time every day for it to be called like like all Japanese all the time?
The core message I've taken from that is to really maximize the amount of time you can with Japanese. For a lot of people, especially myself, I work a full-time job, and one that demands usually quite long hours. So even when I decided to look into this AJAT thing, the thought I had in the back of my head was really just to maximize the amount of time I spent with Japanese, rather than just completely turn everything into Japanese. At first, I maybe did that for like a month. I literally like was just constantly blaring some sort of video, like a lot of manzai in particular, even though I understood like hardly any of it. But like it was really hard to sort of stay motivated and also keep up with all the life commitments and things I wanted to do, as well as also doing my job. So yeah, I mean, some people may say that if you're doing under like 5-6 hours a day, then you're not doing AJAT. But the way I see it is, it's the core message is to do as much Japanese as possible, rather than just do everything in Japanese. In the base form, when it was Katsumoto who created AJAT, his whole idea was turn everything Japanese. He even wrote about eating everything like potato chips, or crisps, if you're British like me, with chopsticks and all that kind of thing. In my perspective, that's probably a bit unnecessary. Similarly, some people advocate for listening to Japanese whilst you're sleeping to get the hours in. But to me, it just doesn't seem worth it. It doesn't help keep you motivated. It doesn't keep you engaged with the language in the same way. To me, it just made me a bit sick of it. So, yeah, to me, I mean, I maximize as much Japanese as I can. So some days, like, I was logging my hours for a bit, and some days I was spending up to like 8 hours a day. But really, like, the minimum can be down to like 1 hour. But I wouldn't say that the days where I'm doing 1 hour, I'm not doing AJAT. I would just say, I'm just doing a little bit less that day.
So what's your usual time for, let's say, immersion? Are you a morning guy, night guy, commute guy?
So originally, when I started working in this job, I was working from 9 a.m. till about 5 p.m., maybe 5:30. And again, obviously, like we get overtime and that kind of thing. Um, but in order to start speaking with Japanese people, I changed my work schedule. So I changed it from like from the 9 to 5 to 7:30 in the morning until 3:30, 4 o'clock. Um, so what that means is it gives me some more opportunity. But basically, in terms of my immersion, I really do fit it in everywhere I can. So if I'm going into the office, that means that I'm commuting by the London Underground. So I'll download loads of videos or audio beforehand, and then I'll spend that hour whilst I'm on the train immersing, and then the hour I spend going home immersing as well. Then when I get home, or even whilst I'm in work, if there's something I can do that's doesn't require my full attention, then I'll just be listening to podcasts and that kind of thing. And then when I get home, I usually try and do 2 hours, if it's not been a really long, stressful day, or I don't have any other priorities on. So like on an average day, that's basically about four hours minimum. And that's whilst working a full-time job. So yeah, I'm probably a night owl. I've become a morning person just to speak with Japanese people, but yeah, no, I mean, I immerse really just whenever I get an opportunity. Even if I'm quite tired, I'll just put on maybe a podcast while I'm doing something else, or that kind of thing. But yeah, it's just about maximizing whatever time I do have, giving that to Japanese if I'm in a good state.
Yeah. I think it's pretty hard for a lot of people to multitask. Even chores or household work requires a certain degree of attention, and then if you're not
Yep.
fully attentive to it, it's really hard to notice like the language that's in your ears. Sometimes it feels like noise in your ears instead of actually helping you get better at Japanese.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely true. So I will say that I have ADHD, so like my attention span is going to be very, very, very different to just a neurotypical person, or even just someone with a different kind of mental disorder or whatever. So for me, like the ironic thing is, if I'm sitting still doing nothing, just staring at my screen, my attention span is actually a lot lower than if I'm doing chores or that kind of thing. So I usually find that those times are the times where I'm actually listening to Japanese a bit more. So for example, if I'm just washing up, like I'll just zone out whilst I'm listening to the podcast, and then next thing I know, I blink and all of the washing up's done, and I've still been listening to Japanese. With that said, like, and particularly during the beginner stages, there was a lot of times where I was zoning, and even now, to be fair, there's a lot of times where I zone out, and like I realize 10 seconds or so have passed, and I have no idea what uh, the the podcast or whatever it is just said. In that case, like you, if you have the time or you're sort of available to do it, you can rewind the video. But equally, like even if you're only paying 50% attention or 75% attention, like to me that's still better than zero. Obviously you get some people that just get sick of it, and it's, as you say, it becomes like just loads of sounds like mumbling or whatever. You don't necessarily pick out the words. But for me, like even during the beginner stages, like just getting used to the sounds, the intonation as well, slowly but surely, like just bit by bit, even if you're only doing like 50, only understanding 50%, or you're only actually paying attention to 50%. To me, that's still going to be better than just not doing anything. And you've got to think that you've only got a certain amount of time in the day. Um, if you can be listening to something else, then just do it. And then when you have more time later on, then you can just listen to that podcast or watch that episode or whatever, in your own time at your own pace. Like there's no rule or something against watching something a second time. So you can just reinforce what you heard the first time, and even though you've missed stuff, like when you're watching it the second time, you'll hear something and be like, oh, I remember hearing that earlier. So clearly you're taking some stuff in, even if it's not 100% attention. 50% is better than 0%, the way I see.
Listening something you've seen before is actually pretty good advice because you could focus on different aspects of the language every time you listen to it. I think it's the advice that Dogen also gave. Like he
Yeah,
considers
yeah.
listening to the same movie like 5 to 6 times just to get the hang of
Yeah,
the
definitely.
flow and the pitch accent.
Yeah, and I will say that there's certain voice actors that I can understand a lot easier, or like I'll watch. So when I first started learning the AJAT method, I watched JoJo Stardust Crusaders probably like 4 times in a row. Each time, like, well, the very first time, I literally every single like word that I thought sounded good, I made a card of. That obviously took me like ages just to get to episode 3 or something. So I was slowly but surely like being more choosy about the words that I pick. But yeah, basically, I mean, I've watched at this point now probably at least 10 times Stardust Crusaders. I've also watched Hunter x Hunter 4 times. The first time was obviously like completely in English. The second and the third time was in Japanese with Japanese subtitles. And then the fourth time is with just Japanese audio. So yeah, I definitely a big advocate of watching something over and over, listening to something over and over. Like there's a few podcast series that I watch that are targeted to Japanese learners, but like advanced or high intermediate learners. So sometimes I'll watch those multiple times if I didn't necessarily catch it. Again, especially those ones where I think, oh, I didn't actually really pay attention to what was just said. I'll rewatch it, and you'll catch the things that you missed. And equally with Hunter x Hunter and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, like using the subtitles even I think is still really really important if you get to a high level. Like the second, if you follow the I+1 philosophy, the second time I watched Hunter x Hunter, so the first time I watched it to learn Japanese, there was just so many words that I didn't know. So there were so many, like I couldn't make I+1 sentences of a lot of words. When it came around to watching it the third time, there was so many more like sentences where there was only one word where I didn't know. So it was just so easy to make loads of different cards. And equally, like the third time and the fourth time, like it, if you increase the amount you know, then there's going to be a lot more sentences where there's only one word, or even less than one word. You understand the whole sentence. So yeah, I'm definitely a big advocate for watching something multiple times. Even once you get to sort of like high intermediate, like it's still really important, and it can give you a lot. Obviously, like if you're watching a kid's show or something and you understand everything perfectly anyway, then maybe there's not much point. But if you're understanding like even 95%, or slightly above that, there's still a lot of benefit in watching it. Even if you're not necessarily learning new vocabulary, if someone's speaking at you and you understand absolutely everything, maybe you can't reproduce it yourself, but if you hear it enough times, then slowly but surely it will become second nature. And that's what I've noticed as well. Like, there's certain podcasts where I've like picked up on some of the manners of speech that they use, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I definitely agree with Dorgan and whoever else advocates for watching something multiple times. I know there's the YouTuber, I think his name's Livaki or Livavki or something. I think he's the Estonian guy. He watched JoJo like 40 times or something like that. So like obviously that's the extreme end of it, but yeah, I mean, watching something more than once, there's no issue with that at all. In retro, well, I would say it's actually genuinely really good for you, and something that you can do quite easily, and you'll catch new things each time you watch it.
I mean, you mentioned about certain voice actors being easier to listen to and picking up certain language features from the things you watch. Is there like
Yeah.
in Asia people often call some person you mimic language language mother or language parent? Do
Yeah,
you have
yeah.
a language parent that you mimic?
I suppose so. Yeah. So less so with anime. I think the main reason for that is like, I mean, the anime I watch, like, I'm quite aware that like if you talk like that, you're gonna sound like a jackass. Like for example, like Jotaro in Stardust Crusaders. If I start talking like him, it's you're not necessarily like if you're friends with someone already, maybe it's not so bad, but he's quite like quite rough around the edges, if you will. So yeah, I do probably, yeah, language parents. So particularly there's two podcasts where I've watched like every single one. So Nihongo Konteppe and also Yu Yu Nihongo Podcast. So yeah, Teppe-san and Yusuke-san is probably my are probably my language parents.
Um, like how do you start mimicking a Japanese person? How do you get started with that? Do you listen to yourself and repeat, or do you do some shadowing? How does that start?
No, so I mean, I don't do shadowing at all. In fact, I really, really hate the sound of my own voice. So I would say when you're a beginner, it's quite hard to, pick up on specific ways of speaking, or it's not necessarily a conscious process. I think if you just hear something like I think for Yu Yu and Teppe, they've got like over 1,000 episodes. So like if you watch it just so many times, then slowly but surely, like some of the words they use, you'll start using instead of other ones. Similarly, like if you speak to like people from Osaka, you'll start saying akan instead of dame, that kind of thing. So it's not necessarily a conscious process, but I think once you become like an intermediate, your brain will start using the words that they use as the most, it's the first thing that pops to your head. So, for example, for Yu Nihongo, instead of saying zannen, he says like a ikansen a lot, which I've like just started saying. I didn't really think like too much of it. It's just, I'm in a conversation and that's the first thing that comes into my head. Also, like some YouTubers will say like, oh, nanka, whereas Teppe says like nanka ko, that kind of thing. So it's not like you can obviously put those words into an Anki deck, but ultimately it's your brain which decides which word is the most appropriate at any one particular time. So the only way to really get something into your active vocabulary is literally just listening to it so many times that it's the first thing that your brain thinks of. Yeah.
So, is it, in your experience, is it more likely that you would just get to understand certain things like grammar or pitch accent just by lots of immersion, or do you supplement it with grammar textbooks or learning about specific pitch patterns?
Yeah. So I think it does come naturally to a fair degree. I would say pitch accent doesn't. Intonation, I would say does, depending on the person, but like pitch accent itself does not come naturally, I don't think. Like even now, like it's really hard for me to produce, like to know exactly which pitch I'm doing. Like obviously that's something that just doesn't exist in English. So it's something that I really have had to, consciously try to a fair degree. My approach is like natural to a fair degree in that when I'm speaking to Japanese people, if I say something that um, like oba-san instead of oba-san, like if I said something like that, they would just correct me on the spot, and then that's just ingrained in my memory, and I know that next time I go to say that, I know to be very careful. I might like pause and be very conscious about the way that I pronounce it. But for some words, it becomes like quite natural over time that you sit there and think so many times that when you speak, it just comes out naturally. With grammar, um, so I would say my approach has been that when I read something, I just treat everything as a new separate word. Obviously, you'll get certain sentence patterns or grammar structures or things like that. But really, I think the main aim is that you look them up when you actually see them. Whereas when you learn via a textbook, each week you're just given loads of new grammar rules, and you're not like it's not authentic. You're not seeing those actual sentences out there, and then you're trying to find out what they mean. You're doing it in a backwards way, and you're being given a structure, and you then have to apply that to sort of other sentences, which to me like it doesn't stay in your memory as easily. I think you're bound to make more mistakes, and similarly, it's not something that you actually acquire. It's something that you memorize, and each time you go to use it, you have to sit there and think, and maybe it takes you 2 or 3 seconds, and then you can say it. But it's clear that you only memorize that; you don't actually know it. Um, so yeah, I think you can pick up some things, quote unquote, naturally, but realistically, you're going to have to look up a lot. I think with languages like Spanish or French or German, you can look at things and you can immediately look at them, and even if you don't use a textbook, you can guess what the word is or you'll know what it is. And similarly with Japanese, when you get to a higher level, if with a lot of I+1 sentences, you'll just you'll see the whole sentence, you'll know the context, and there might be a word you don't know, but based on either the kanji or the sound of it, you can have a good guess at what it means. So there's some you can pick up naturally, particularly in European languages or languages with a lot of similarities. But you will, it's undoubtable that you're going to have to look a lot of things up. Like, there's no way that you can just watch anime, from complete zero, just watch anime all day, and then in 2 years you'll speak Japanese. Maybe you can pick up like some basic phrases and like tadaima, that kind of thing. But I don't think you're gonna get proficient in the language unless you do some form of active studying. Obviously, the idea is to use as much immersion as possible, but if you can look something up, I don't see why you wouldn't if it's going to help you. There's no need to try and memorize it. But if you look it up, you understand what it means. That's fine. You can just leave it there, and then the next time you see it, you'll think, oh, I remember looking this up. Actually, this means so and so. So yeah, there's a fair degree that you can probably pick up naturally. But yeah, you're gonna. I think you're gonna have to use tools, or you would be silly not to use tools if they're available to you. It's just about the approach and the mindset that you have in going about learning Japanese, I think.
I think grammar textbooks are not that much, or that do not take that much of time of someone's time to like read and study before
Yeah,
they
yeah.
do immersion. I think similar to how pitch accent works and how you start recognizing the patterns and then seeing them in the wild, and that helps. I think the same can apply for grammar, where you learn certain grammatical patterns, and then when you see them in the wild, that recognition process helps you memorize and understand the grammar patterns better. I don't think they
Yeah,
have necessarily have to be either do this or do that.
I think like for me the main thing is like when you're doing a textbook, you're literally just learning grammar patterns back to back to back. So, and I think for a lot of people that do textbooks, they don't necessarily do immersion as well. Maybe they just think the textbook's going to cover them nicely, or they need to wait for immersion once they've done the textbook. But I think you can just do them at the same time, or you can do one before the other. But I think you do need to be immersing at least to a fair degree, just so that when, as you say, when you do learn those patterns, when you do see them in the wild, your brain makes that immediate connection. But if you're just learning, let's say, like this is actually what I did. So I just drilled literally all of the N5 to N1 grammar patterns. Literally just made Anki cards for all of them. There are so many that I don't really remember, or maybe I'll see them and I'd say, oh, okay, I know what that means. But I think the ones that I've acquired are the ones that I've learned, and then literally like a few days later, I've seen that in the wild or someone said it, and I'm like, yes, I know that, and then it's just in my brain. I think a lot of people have like pressure to try and memorize things. I think if you just see something, look it up, you understand the meaning, then again the next time you'll see it, you'll just know it. You don't necessarily need to make an Anki card, or again you can, and it will help, but some people don't, like, they just look it up on the spot and then just forget about it, and then they'll still be able to acquire it. So I mean, there's many different ways you can go about it, but I think immersion and seeing the things that you're learning actually in the wild are important. And it goes back to something Matt said, and what you just touched on. Like, once you see something the first time, like, you'll be like that. I don't know if you've seen it, like the Leonardo DiCaprio meme where he's just like pointing at the TV. Like, every time you'll see the word you've just learned, you'll be like, oh, I know that word. Uh, so yeah, like there's a lot of benefit to doing immersion, even if you're like at the really early stages. But it's just making sure that you're balancing it out, because you can't just do all immersion and hope to pick up the language. And equally, I don't think you can just do a grammar book without immersion and just hope that you retain it all, because if you don't see those sentence patterns or the vocabulary or whatever actually being used, then your brain's going to disregard it as unimportant information, or only information that you need for a test or something, rather than things that you actually need to use in a conversation, or to summon at like a millisecond, rather than seconds.
So I've seen people who immerse a lot through reading or watching, but
Yeah.
they have a lot of problems with either speaking or writing. So what have
Yeah.
you done? What have you done that have improved your output ability, and what mistakes do you think you have made along the way? Like, what do you recommend people to do or not do?
Yeah, so I think my main concern was like just speaking too early. There's obviously a lot of people that advocate for not speaking early. Obviously, like when you're learning Japanese, it's really hard to assess how good you actually are. Like for me, like even now when I'm in a conversation, I'll still say, like I'm intermediate. But then people will be like, well, you're obviously not intermediate, or you're not a beginner or whatever. So I think it's just getting an idea of you know at what point you should start speaking. So for example, if you're doing Anki and your goal is to do 10,000 cards, it's a good idea to say that, okay, after 5,000 cards, I'm going to try speaking. Um, Even if you tried, like at 5,000 or 6,000 or whatever, it's not important the specific time you go into it. Um, but if you have an idea in your head that, I'm gonna hold off speaking for this long, but then I'm gonna try then. It doesn't really matter how long you wait. As when you start speaking, you're always going to be rusty. I've probably got like, I think maybe about 100 hours or something in speaking now, which obviously is not like a lot. But like when I first started, I was like, I could understand everything that everyone was saying, but like it took me so long to think of what to say. I didn't have the confidence that like to use this word in this context, or that kind of thing. And like I would sit there and just type out words into DeepL or something, like or just in Notepad. Like the Japanese sentence I already know, but like my brain has to like really take long to process it. So and that was the same when I first started trying to speak after like 6 months. I also then waited like a few more months and tried again. It didn't really matter how long I waited and tried. I was rusty every single time. The only thing I found that's improved it is just by sticking with it and going. Like you're gonna make mistakes either way. You're gonna be slow, but your brain is a really important tool. It's really powerful, and you will adapt. Equally, like there's with like subtitles and watching without subtitles. I think it's all like a mental block. Like after watching a certain number of something, your brain just naturally adapts to what's in front of it. So yeah, the to go back to how I actually started speaking. In the UK, like our time difference with Japan is like 8 hours or something. Like it's really intense. So like when I'm finishing work in the UK, people in Japan are already asleep. So the way that I speak with Japanese people is using VR chat. I think it's a really important tool. Like you can do it anonymously. You can go into new worlds and try and speak with people. And if it doesn't work out, then like if you join, for example, like the English/Japanese servers where there's Japanese people learning English and English people learning Japanese. Everyone in there is going to be learning, so you're not going to get judged for your level. And if you do, you can obviously just block them and never have to think about them again. Whereas obviously, if you're taking a tutor, you have to invest some money. You obviously have to show your face, and it's a whole process. So I really recommend just using like online tools, whether it's VR chat or like just playing Apex or whatever you can do to mix with Japanese people. It doesn't matter how like trash you are at speaking Japanese. Like it's a process. You're not gonna just immerse for however long and then just speak and you're already perfect. Even those people that have waited like 2 years or something, they're still going to make mistakes when they speak. Obviously, it's going to be less mistakes than someone who started speaking after one day or whatever. But mistakes are inevitable. So yeah, my idea is just having a clear idea on when you should start speaking, trying it, and then sticking with it for maybe like 1 to 2 weeks. And if it doesn't work, then you can wait another 1,000 sentences, 2,000 sentences, however long you want to wait. But don't be afraid to start speaking once you've got the basics down. You will pick it up. Your brain will adapt. And even those like very limited things that you do know, you'll get really good at using those things so that when you start learning more, you'll already have a good framework in place to start using Japanese effectively.
So would you say someone who's around N5 and N4 can start practicing speaking or do you think they have to be at N3 or N2 level?
Yeah, I think it really depends on what your goals are. Like, I mean, if you look at the amount of vocabulary that's in the JLPT, I think like N1 is like 12,000 words or something like that. Um, N5, I'm just looking up the word count now. I would say it's probably like less than 1,000 words for N5. Obviously there's not going to be much that you can reasonably say with that. So like it depends on what your goals are, right? Like if you want to go somewhere to make friends, um, or you want to go there and speak with someone else who's Japanese and just started learning English and at a similar spot with you, then you can obviously go in and try and find those kinds of people, and then both of you with your very broken Japanese and English, you can start trying to speak to each other, or using like crosstalk. Like if you understand a lot more than you can actually say, then both of you speak in your own native language, and then slowly but surely try and work out what to say. But yeah, I mean, in my personal opinion, it's probably best to get like, if you're doing like a 2,000 or 3,000 word sentence deck, like the most common 2,000 words, if you get that out of the way, then like there's no problem trying to start speaking after then. You're going to have to look up a lot of words, like there's no question about that. But if you don't mind tolerating some ambiguity, then if someone says a word, you can say, like, oh, what did you just say? Like, or can you repeat that again? And then you can look the word up on your,
Yeah.
on your phone or whatever. And then, yeah, those words will really stick in your brain because, you've heard them from a Japanese person. You've heard them in a sentence that you are completely immersed in. And although you didn't understand it at the time, it's going to create that core memory for you that you're going to be able to use it better. So, yeah, my opinion is to probably hold off speaking until maybe like N3 level. But like some people say, like you shouldn't be speaking until you're 10,000 sentences, which I just like completely disagree with. I think as soon as you're comfortable enough, if you can understand like a decent amount, let's just say like you're watching anime and you can understand like with Japanese subtitles at least like 80% of what's being said, then that to me is a really good chance, a really good point to start trying to speak Japanese.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge for me was that, like, even if I was able to say something in Japanese at N4, N3 level, when the other person says something back to me, I couldn't understand what they're saying because they're
Yeah,
using
yeah,
vocabulary way beyond my level. I mean, I guess it's easier in
yeah,
Japanese compared to like Mandarin Chinese, where I've seen it a lot, even with like advanced learners, where they simply just use um, a katakana variant or English loan word because they forget what the Japanese word is, and the other person
yeah, yeah,
completely gets it because they've also received like English education, they understand most basic English words. Whereas that would not be very possible in Mandarin in mainland China. You would have to know the words in order to communicate. You can't just rely on your
yeah.
English vocabulary.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's what I was saying earlier. Like with European languages, there's so much vocabulary, so many grammar structures that are almost identical to English. And sometimes like in terms of grammar, it might be the exact same meaning. It might be, you know, more or less exactly the same, just they say it in a different way. Whereas with Japanese, like there will be times that you say things in Japanese that you would just never say things in English, or your phraseology would be completely different. The words the way that the words that you might use is going to be completely different. So yeah, like you're going to have to rely a lot more on looking things up, compared with like Spanish or German or French. Um, yeah, it's unfortunately just one of those things, and you really do have to be someone that's happy to tolerate some ambiguity with Japanese. And I will say, like, when my main problem learning in a classroom was exactly like what you've just said. Like, even if I could say something, I could never understand the response. So when I learned about this whole AJAT thing, it just made a lot more sense to me. Like a classroom approach to me was like running before you could walk, whereas AJAT is like you learn to walk and then slowly but surely then you can start learning how to run. So yeah, it's like almost a completely different phenomenon. Like you're learning in a classroom, you can say all these things because you've had to drill them like a million times, but you can't actually understand the response because the only times you've heard them is your professor or tutor or whatever saying it very slowly or clearly, um, or like other foreigners within your class pronouncing it in their broken Japanese to be like just perfectly straight. Whereas obviously like when you do AJAT, the like my issue when trying to speak after 6 months was people would be speaking stuff at me and I could understand it perfectly. But when it comes to speaking, I really had to hesitate and I didn't know which word was the best one to use. So I was like constantly looking things up and checking my own understanding. And it was quite annoying to be honest because like there was other people who like I could tell that my like comprehension was better than theirs because like in conversations they would be asking more like, oh, what did you just say, or they clearly just didn't understand, whereas I would understand but I just didn't know how to reply. So yeah, like I think no matter what approach you do there's always going to be problems. I think if you hold off on speaking too long then you're going to understand everything and not be able to speak, which is going to be frustrating. Equally, if you put too much focus on speaking things and memorizing patterns and not actually listening to Japanese, then you're going to be able to say all these different things but you're not actually going to be able to understand anything.
外資系だとしたらやっぱり東京ですよね。
そうですね。まあ東京はめちゃくちゃいい街と思うけど、まあ大阪もいいと思うよ。でもまあ2回日本に行ったことがあるんだけど、えーどれも東京だった。ちょっともったいないけど、えっと、そうそう、今度、日本に行くと、大阪や京都に行くつもりで、なので、まあ、それを行ったらいいなって思ったら、まあ、それにも、まあ、そこにも働ければ、まあ、それも選ぶと思う。
日本に行った時もうすでに日本語ペラペラなんですか？その時はまだ日本
まあ、
語を勉強してないんですか？
そうですね。まあ、間違いなく勉強中と思うけど、まあ、ペラペラっていうほどではないと思う。まだ中級者のレベルぐらいと思う。まあ、リスニングと、リーディングは、まあ、別に問題なくできると思うけど、まあ、スピーキングってなったら、まあ、たくさん間違いするし、えっと、まあでもね、俺が思うのは、実際に日本に行ったら、多分3ヶ月後に、まあ、ペラペラになるんじゃないかなと思う。そのくらいのレベルだと思う。今は。
なんかケーキみたいにまだ日本にいてないからまだや焼いて
そう
ない
ですね。
という状態みたいですね。なんか材料準備万端でまだオーブンに入れてないということなんですね。まあ、うん、多
まあ
分。
そうですね。イマージョンは本当に重要なものだと思います。まあそうですね。まあ特に、仕事の中で、まあ俺がやってる仕事の中でも、まあいろんな、まあ、一生聞いたことはない言葉がいつも出てきて、それが、まあ日本にもあるはずなので、それ、それに達成するのに、まだ、まあ準備しなきゃいけないみたいな感じだと思います。
うん。
まあ、でもね、まあ、大学に行った時にはね、まあ、中国人のまあ、大学生は結構いて、まあ、時に、俺の隣に座っている 中国人、授業の中でね、その授業で、俺の、中国人の友達が、わからない言葉が出てきたら、即座に、定義を検索して、あ、なるほどっていう顔をしてた。なので、俺も同じような、出方をすると思います。方法。仕事をしたらね。
もちろん漢字わかる人は日本語をもっと並べやすいと思いますけど。
そうですね。俺のレベルとしては、リーディングは、言った通り問題なくできると思うので、いい、普通の日本人に聞いたら、どのくらい漢字できるのって、それを聞いたら、まあね、ちょっと退化したっていうかなので、日本人も、まあ、実際に書けない言葉がたくさんあって、
まあ日本語学習以外の趣味とかありましたら。
そうですね、ゲーミングとか、そういうのをよくするし、俺はちょっと退屈な人だと思います。ほぼ、日常で、一日中は、日本語で、勉強しようとするんだけど、もちろん気が散るので、特に、RTS のゲーム大好きで、それを、たくさん時間を割いたので、それも趣味って言う
あ、
かもしれない。
RTS ですか？ RTS？
そうですね。歴史的な、戦略ゲームっていうのかな。
あ、
戦略
三国志とか。
そう。全世界支配みたいな感
あ、
じです。そう、歴史的なので、特に、番号はめちゃくちゃ苦手なんだけど、1000、1444年から、1000、えっと、800、12年までのゲーム。なので、歴史的なところがいっぱいあって、日本の戦国時代みたいな感じも
うん。
できるし、えっと、めちゃくちゃ古い帝国とか最初はイングランドで始まるんだけど、それを、帝国にして、全世界を支配するみたいなゲーム。ちょっとつまらないけど、まあ、俺と、少なくとも俺にとって面白くて、まあ、時間を割やすいみたいなゲーム。
ゲームの言語
時間
も、
を無駄にするゲーム。
ゲームの言語も日
すみません。
本語に設定されてますか？
そうですね。最近思ったのは、それを、やらなきゃいけないんじゃないかなって思ったけど、
スポーツとか、
完全に合法です。
見てますか？
そうですね。サッカー、やっぱり大好きで、最近、日本勉強してるからこそ、日本、日本代表にも応援してるので、それも、盛り上がったっていうか、結構、没頭していて、いいなって思います。そう。サッカーは、普通に見てるスポーツ。それ以外はあんまり見ない気がする。
ロンドンで住んでいる日本人多分いますよね。
うん、そうですね。でもね、 やっぱりここに来る日本人はほとんどが、えっと、まあ貧乏じゃない人まあ資格をまあめちゃくちゃいい資格を持っている日本人なので、その方がロンドンの真ん中に住んでいて、えっと、まあそうですね、話す機会はあんまりなくて、まあ特に俺の、住んでるところの中でね、あんまりいないよ、日本人は。まあ、一緒で、会ったことはないっ
うん。
て言ってもぐらい。俺の、まあ、特に、まあ、具体的に言うと、俺が、東の方に住んでいるので、まあ、ほとんどの日本人は、まあ、西か、真ん中に住んでるので、あんまり合わない。そ
他の学習
う。
者
名所、
から聞くと、ハロートークで自分で住んで
うん、
る場所の近くにある学習者とカネクトして、
うん、
なんかあオフ会とか
うん、
集まって言語交換という活動でもでき
うん。
るって。
そうですね。まあ、あれも、まあ、ある程度ですね。ある程度、ハロートークを使ってたんだけど、まあ、ほとんどの時間は、まあ、ライティングか、リーディングしかなかった気がする。まあ、俺、えっと、俺より日本人と実際に会って、まあ、リアルに会って、リアルで会って、えっと、まあ、会話するっていうのが、まあ、普通と思ってき聞くんだけど、俺が、まあ、やってないね、まだ。ちょっと怖くてまあ、覚悟してないっていうか、えーっと、そうですね。でもね、やっぱり、ハロートークを入ったら、まあ、即座に出てくるのは、まあ、近くに住んでいる日本人なんだけど、えっと、俺には、えっと、まあ、真ん中に住んでる人しか出てこないみたいな。あんまり、俺の、まあ、近くに、俺の、地元とかに住んでる日本人もあんまりいないので、そういう機能はあんまり利用できないみたいな